that match. And we see Mike Brill has won the all-important die roll here. And there you see those two game-ending planeswalkers against Team Reclamation, Teferi Time Raveler and Narset Powder Veils working together in perfect harmony here.
And this hand on Michael Brill's side is what we in the business refer to as the draw. That is exactly what you want to see early on, having that early copy of Growth Spiral, as well as both of your 3-mana Planeswalkers to slam the door shut is going to be huge for Brill.
This is how Brill draws it up in this matchup. But Aurillax, a mulligan to 6, putting back an Expansion Explosion, which you want to see that maybe 8 to 10 turns from now. Not the card you need when your resources are limited here on a 6-card hand.
Bright side, there are some lands, and there's a Mystical Dispute, which is going to be able to tag likely the Teferi Time Raveler from Brill here.
And just leading off in a triumph here for Brill. And it slows off for both players, although Brill does have the Growth Spiral to follow up with. That is the card that really gives you that crucial mana advantage in this matchup. But with Bant Ramp, you don't have those 4-mana plays to accelerate into on turn 3. No Wilderness Reclamation or Nightpack Ambush, so that gives you a nod draw, so to speak.
Yeah, a lot of the thing that Growth Spiral is doing is it is either going ahead and it's helping you sink mana into a spell on your second turn where you're a bit light on cards, or on turn 3, you can go Growth Spiral into another 2-mana interactive spell.
Against the aggressive decks, Shadow the Sky is the 4-drop that you really want to be ramping into on turn 3 some of the time. And we saw that play out in the Jim Davis match earlier, where the band player there would love to have been able to deploy that on turn 3. But Brill's turn 3 here is going to be Teferi Time Raveler, and he's going to put Ari to the test, see if he has a Mystical Dispute, which he does. And Ari will get to untap and presumably cast Uro here, although he can also Hollow Aethergast if he's scared of Nissa Who Shakes the World, which it looks like he is.
Yeah, this is the line where if a Nissa Who Shakes the World comes down for Brill, that would just spell doom if Ari doesn't have an immediate answer to it.
And here's Narset Powder Veils, which is not quite the same as Teferi Time Raveler, but can be equally or even more devastating in some spots.
It's time for everyone's favorite game, Narset Powder Veils. Is it a Nissa Who Shakes the World?
No, it's Narset Powder Veils, Emma. And we see Aurillax with Shark Typhoon at the ready. Decides to catch that one in for a baby shark.
Do.
Thank you.
Someone's got to do it. I'm just out here working my butt off on a Sunday morning.
That's why we need the soundboard ready, so Cedric and Patrick can default to that themselves.
Patrick would go air horns, aggro air horns all the time.
But look at this, Wilderness Reclamation off the top for Aurillax, so he'll get to stick that here. The Narset going to neuter that Expansion Explosion, even if it does get to resolve, but still working back into into mana equality in this game with that Reclamation.
Yeah, being able to actually stick a copy of Wilderness Reclamation is going to be huge here for Lax. He may end up holding off if he's afraid it'll just get tagged by something like an Elspeth Conquers Death, which he doesn't really have a good answer for at this point.
Right, we could see him, under other circumstances, go for Uro here, but that's not going to be as impressive, missing out on the draw thanks to Narset Powder Veils. So he will just tap out for the Reclamation, crossing his fingers, hoping to fade in Elspeth Conquers Death, and if Brill wants another look at it with the Narset, he can, but he will have to cash that Narset in as a result.
Yeah, at this point I would expect something closer to just casting the Uro, going ahead, getting that developed into the graveyard, and then holding up this Shark Typhoon to protect Narset. Narset acting as a sort of floodgate against Uro and Explosion here is something that I imagine Brill's going to find more valuable than a random look at an Elspeth Conquers Death.
And in this situation, the only thing that can be a bad guy with a Shark Typhoon is a good guy with a Shark Typhoon. Mike Brill able to make a 5/5 Shark here with instant speed on Ari's turn. And we'll see if Ari tries to keep pressuring the Shark with the knowledge that Mike Brill is just passing the turn with boatloads of open mana. We're passing to attackers. And yeah, Ari's going to hold off. And so now we'll see, does Ari want to cash in the Explosion to take down the Narset, which, with the way, say, base effects work, even if the Narset would die as a result, he won't get to draw the cards from that. Instead, he's going to just use this Wilderness Reclamation, Castle Vantress engine that we've seen use to such good effect in Team Reclamation over the past few months.
And the big question there for Ari is if he wanted to just float mana with Explosion, if he had the hard read on a Shark Typhoon and pass turn with a bunch of mana up, but you really need to make something happen if you're in Ari's seat right now. You're kind of falling behind. You know that Brill's threats work better in a vacuum than yours do, and you need some way to get your synergies online. Those synergies being Explosion, just drawing a million cards or something to that effect.
And Ari does have 2 copies of Blast Zone, which can work in tandem with the Wilderness Reclamation to remove the Narset in one turn. Only 1 copy of Brazen Borrower in terms of hard answers to the Narset, so he's going to have to hope to remove it through combat, which in the face of the 5/5 Shark and the Shadow of the Sky and the Hydro Crisis in Brill's hand is going to be difficult.
Well, the other answer that Ari has in deck is 2 copies of Blast Zone, which is something we've seen these Team of Reclamation decks make great use of to pick off these pesky 3-mana prison pieces. Say that 5 times real fast.
So nice tongue twisters here early, just to keep us nimble.
Really, the Peter Piper of Magic slang.
And we could see Brill maybe get aggressive with his own Shark. You know, that's a substantial clock by itself, and then Uro or Hydro Crisis to follow it up could add to that pressure even more.
I think a lot of this just comes down to wanting to know how on the battlefield Brill's going to be after this. Because ultimately, it feels like that Narset is just holding a lot back right now.
A 4/4 Hydro Crisis looks like it will get tagged by a Mystical Dispute. Luckily, Brill will also get to draw 2 cards, gain 2 life from that.
So this is a big mana exchange that favors Ari, but Ari needs to make use of that mana, or the level of mana that he gained on it doesn't really matter that much.
And Brill just continuing to make his land drops. And you see one weakness of this Bant Ram deck is that it is more prone to flooding than some of these other Breeding Pool Growth Spiral decks, where in Team of Reclamation, you're happy to make every land drop if there's an explosion waiting for you at the end of the tunnel. And same thing with Shark Typhoon. For Brill, you know, unless he finds another Hydro Crisis or another Shark Typhoon, he doesn't really have the same level of payoff cards that you get when you have 10 lands in play.
Exactly, and having something like Wilderness Reclamation in these Reclamation decks makes it so having a bunch of redundant copies of Blast Zone, of Castle Vantress, and so on is really going to pay off in a big way, whereas Brill only has access to 1 Vantress in the 75, and even then, that's a ton of mana for not a huge effect when a lot of your cards are just kind of redundant, grindy +1 pieces.
So Castle Vantress activation for Ari, responded to with Growth Spiral for Mike Brill, who finds Joriel, whose effect we mentioned on the game before, doesn't have too much to follow that up with, but Joriel with Uro actually is that a Splinter Twin situation, Emma?
Well, I wouldn't call it a Splinter Twin situation. Well, not a Deceiver Exarch Splinter Twin situation. If we want to call it like a Grizzly Bear Splinter Twin situation, then I would go that far.
Sure thing. And for Ari, we see he does pick up a copy of Shark Typhoon, which he can use along with that Wilderness Reclamation to make a bigger Shark than Brill has. But again, Narset Powder Veils, meaning he would not get a card back from the cycling there. So it looks like Ari deciding to hold off on that for now.
At this point, it really feels like Ari is just looking for more mana.
And just imagine how different this game would be if that Narset was basically any other card. Even if it was a seemingly more imposing threat like a Nizza who shakes the world, Ari could deal with that. He really has no convenient way at the moment to remove that Narset, and it is doing a number on him in this game.
Yeah, this is a situation where Brill is really just getting paid off for kind of planning themselves and saying, this is what I want to be. This is the best card in the matchup. I'm going to load up on it and make sure that I can protect the queen.
And in the article I wrote about Bant Ram this week for SCG Premium, I said Narset Powder Veils is the card you want to move to for Bant Ram if you're choosing to stick with that deck. And I landed on like 1 copy in the main deck, 1 in the sideboard, and I said, maybe you could put the 2nd in the main deck if you really want to commit to this. Brill said, okay, sure thing, buddy. I'm playing the 4/4. I'm making a bold statement about this card's effectiveness in this matchup and in this format, and he's being handsomely rewarded for that so far.
And look at this entire exchange. We saw Joel Rail into Sorcery Speed Cycle Shark Typhoon from Brill. Ari Lax responding, Aether Gusting the Joel Rail, which means that Brill doesn't get that token, and made a 1/1 Shark Typhoon to find it. So now, this is giving Ari that window that he needs to actually pressure the Narset if he can just find a way to get the Shark Typhoon token out of the way.
And look at this. Second Wilderness Reclamation for Ari Lax, meaning he gets to scry an additional time every turn cycle with that Castle Vantress, but also that explosion in his hand, maybe it's not drawing any cards, but it might just be ending the game. We are getting dangerously close to counting to 18 here.
Yeah, glancing over Brill's list here, the only real answer to a colossal explosion through this is a copy of Teferi Time Raveler. I'm not seeing any copies of Mystical Dispute. I'm not seeing any Aether Gust in the main deck. These Narsets are the flex hate pieces that Brill is main decking.
And if you want to make room for those Narsets, while also still having enough copies of cards like Shadow the Sky and so on, then something does have to give somewhere. And so other cards that might be good here, like maybe a main deck Dovin's Veto or something of that nature, he doesn't have that to dig for. So he is under some kind of pressure to end the game quickly. Luckily, those two gigantic sharks can really help with that.
Ooh, how do you feel about a Brazen Borrower? That one of from Ari Lax in the main deck, making an appearance on this Castle Vantress scry. That could be exactly the kind of card that Ari needs to get this explosion off the ground.
That might seal this game up for Ari Lax. If he can send back that Narset Paddlefails, then all bets are off.
And that's exactly what's so strong about this Team of Reclamation deck, is you just give it one turn of breathing room and it will bury you.
And these Reclamation decks, they know they have to deal with Teferi Time Raveler, and a lot of the same tools that are good at doing that, incidentally, line up well against Narset Powder Veil. So when you choose to lean on Narset as your main plan, you are acknowledging that the Reclamation decks are coming prepared. You're not catching them unawares, even if this isn't the exact fight they were prepared for.
Right. It's one of those spots where even if your card ends up being good against them, it's not something that's closing the game quickly, right? No one looks at a Narset Parter of Veils and go, right, yeah, no, this is a turn 4 kill in a bottle.
Yeah, the ideal sequence there is that you use your Narset to find something else that can end the game quickly, or to back it up and apply pressure. And it hasn't really panned out that way for Mike Brill in this game. Now there's a Nizzy who shakes about it. That qualifies as pressure. And Joriel making its return appearance here as well.
Uro could even escape this turn? It feels like there's a lot going right for Brill here, but I'm worried about the impact that this explosion could have on the game if Brill doesn't close.
Bear in mind, those two sharks will get to attack this turn for Brill, and then if the next turn Joriel can pump up everything else if Brill's hand is large enough. Also, Uro, if it does escape from Mike Brill, it's going to make that board even more formidable. So this might be a one-turn clock, effectively. Ari is in check now.
Wait, but look at this read. Okay, so attacking with both of these sharks, if Lax just takes it and goes to 3, then that Brazen Borrower doesn't matter because Lax can just attack down the Narset. So this is a clear signal that Brill thinks we are past that part of the game, and he does not think an explosion will get Lax back into this.
Yeah, his thinking is, even if Ari is able to attack down Narset, then the explosion on that one turn is very unlikely to be lethal.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you draw 15 cards in a turn if you die with 7 in hand.
And what we often see is a smaller explosion so that you can cast an interactive card that you find off it once you've drawn your 5 or your 10 cards. But Mike Brill would have so many lethal threats that Ari could not possibly deal with all of them at the same time.
Yeah, this is a weird situation where I almost feel like Ari may be very well priced into going Brazen Borrower on Narset, into Explosion on Uro, into hope to find an Aether Gust just for Joel Rail? Is that a realistic line? Because putting this Narset back in hand makes Joel Rail's activated ability that much better.
Yeah, I think we have to use Uro just to gain some life, maybe make another land drop and kind of cast that Uro for free in that case. And then, yeah, I don't think that explosion is going upstairs. I think Ari has to use that on one of the, a Shark token, or a Joriel, or an Uro, or really any of those are good choices here.
QQ, in-step, first Reclamation trigger, second Reclamation trigger, 10 total mana on the pool for Lax, 6 untapped lands.
It is worth noting, too, that Brazen Borrower as a 3-1 can come down just to jump in front of one of those Shark tokens.
Okay,
but Nissa Who Chasing One might also... Nissa can also change this combat math too.
Oh, and that's 3 more points. And when Lax is at 13, that could actually shift things a lot when one of these attackers is going in for 5.
Look at this. Explosion for 6 on a Shark token. And there's an Ether Gust for Ari Lax and a Knifepack Ambusher.
And a Negate. Negate tags Nissa.
Can we just cast everything in this turn? So let's see. We have mana floating. So now we cast Uro. But at this point, just a Jor-El activation by itself is lethal, so we have to do something else.
You see Brill trying to decide, agonizing over whether or not this Uro needs to go on top. Brill last turn signaled that he thinks the game is close to over. Is he going to have time to rebuy that Uro? If not, you want to put it on bottom. But if he thinks that Lax has made a play that's going to make this game go longer, having that grindy tool is crucial.
Also, Ari is maybe finding a way to survive through this turn, but he doesn't have that second explosion. He doesn't have that follow-up big payoff to get the game over with. So maybe he survives a turn, but Brill certainly has some gas left in the tank, and maybe he just pushes for lethal on the following turn instead.
Okay, and you mentioned this Nissa making an elemental. How good are those elementals with Jor-El?
Those are fantastic. We saw some awkward interactions with Nissa Who Shakes the World and Mutate in some of our previous events, which just not worked the way you wanted to. Nissa with Jor-El works exactly the way that you wanted to, where those 3/3 lands get their base power boosted up even further, and then you get 3 extra power on top of that. So we will see Negate answer Nissa Who Shakes the World. And now a Jor-El activation would not be lethal, and also Mike Brill does not have the 6 mana left over to do that. So that negate a really crucial draw there for Ari Lax, who otherwise, that Nissa would turbocharge all of those other forests that Brill has left in play.
And the nice thing about it being a negate over something like an Aether Gust is that Nissa is just gone.
And so now we're attacking for 8, putting Lax down to 5. We get to follow up with Narset Powder Veils if we want to.
And if you're in Brill's spot, you have to wonder, do you think that stymieing the card draw is going to be better here? Or do you want to play this Uro, hope to rip a land off the top and cast both?
Definitely some options here for Mike Brill. I think just getting the Narset down is going to prove superior here.
Yeah, I really like just being positive that Narset's going to happen, but if you think you're just in a spot where Ari has all of these cards already, where that damage has been done, you may just think you need to develop closer to having more threats on the battlefield, which Uro is going to do.
And Brill does go for Uro. Finds a Hallowed Fountain.
Oh, gets paid.
So he will get to follow up with that Narset Powder Veils, and we'll see what that can dig up for Mike Brill.
Okay, no, this is a real line, because that also represents a panther. A cat? A panther? It's just a cat, but... From Jor-El, Narset finding a Teferi Time Raveler. Lax needs to make something happen.
But look at that negate there for Ari Lax. So if he wants to pick a fight on Mike Brill's turn, he's better able to do that. If Brill has some kind of game-ending play, then in theory he could stop that, but Teferi as a precursor is going to make that a lot harder. So we'll see what Ari can put together on this turn. It has to be something good.
Well,
escaping Uro is a nice start here.
Yeah, this is a weird situation where, because he gets to escape it immediately, it does just represent a ton of land drops, which does have value when you have 2 Wilderness Racks and a Castle of Antris hanging out.
Ari would love to get that redraw back from the Uro. Sadly, Narset is going to stymie that once again. And the Brazen Burrow still lying in wait to jump in front of a Shark token, if it has to.
Ari double-checking that he has the mana necessary to activate this Vantris.
Confirms that he does, and we'll see that Scrytu here.
No reason
bottom
not
there
to
for
just
Ari.
check all your boxes.
Play effectively a free Knifepack Ambusher while we're at it. And oh, look at that. Elspeth Conquers Death for Mike Brill. And now that might get tagged by the negate, but he has the Teferi to lead into that with.
All right, step 1.
So we'll start with Teferi. And if that resolves and we get to bounce something, we even get a cat back from Jor-El, or a dog, or some kind of creature. And Ari is forced to use his negate. And now this isn't exactly lethal for Mike Brill here. Ari will get one more cycle full of Castle Vantresses and untaps and getting a chance to find another explosion.
The fact that Uro gained 6 life is worth so much.
But by my count, Ari cannot put together a lethal explosion on this following turn unless he would have something like Growth Spiral or into another land to help charge that. But then, yet again, Narset Powder Veil is locking that down before it's even happened.
Maybe there's a world where the Brazen Borrower doesn't block the Shark? You can go after Narset to set up that line? This is so complicated. Brill just needs to pick something to deal with this Elspeth, or for this Elspeth Conqueror's Death to eat.
Yeah, the Brazen Borrower being effectively face up means that line can only happen if Brill wants it to happen. So we'll see how he uses that information here.
All right, ECD takes down the Ambusher.
But getting that 5 damage in with the Shark could be the difference between lethal this turn and not being lethal, or lethal on the following turn, and not being lethal on that following turn.
And just passing here means that Lax doesn't have to cast a Brazen Borrower. He just gets to use this Castle Vantress instead.
2 more on the bottom, so he'll be glad he did. And Castle Vantress on upkeep, it looks like.
Ari Lax is empty-handed. He can't have a bad draw step.
2 more to the bottom again. Oh, Blast Zone. What does that do here?
Oh my! I mean, it can kill Jor-El. It could kill. It could really kill any of these permanents on the battlefield. The big thing he runs the risk of doing is taking his own Uro out at the same time.
So we might have to see that once blockers have already been declared, but at that point.
Ugh.
So Brazen Borrower can come in. That can block a Shark. Uro can block something else. So even with a stacked hand from Mike Brill, the Jor-El activation doesn't represent lethal quite yet.
Is there a world where the number is 2 on Lax's turn just to go ahead and be done with that Jor-El? Before it gets a chance to activate?
That removes one of the more pressing threats, but then again, that Elspeth Conqueror's Death on the following turn, that's returning something, and if it represents lethal, that's going to be Jor-El.
Mm-hmm.
You see there, another Castle Vantress activation, 1 bottom, 1 top, and we can confirm that is an expansion explosion.
Okay. Oh.
But now, we can play both copies of Elspeth Conqueror's Death on this turn, so that explosion is growing smaller and smaller by the second. If Mike Brill wants to take down those 2 copies of Wilderness Reclamation, he can do it.
Yeah, and at a glance, I think that if you just get the 2 blockers out of the way with an Elspeth Conqueror's Death, this is going to be 1 short of lethal for Brill. So it may just be better for him to go ahead and keep playing this sort of slower, more controlly role and go after those Wilderness Reclamations.
And at that point, even if Ari Lax, I guess he could take Blast Zone up to 5, but even then, Mike Brill still has an impressive board, and he has his own Uro ready to escape. So Elspeth, continuing to conquer death here, Mike Brill taking a more aggressive line, tags the Uro with the first one. We'll see if he follows up with the second and what that one targets.
Oh my god, with that other Elspeth Conqueror's Death trigger, Ari Lax is 1 point short and can only deal 24 with an explosion off the top.
And I'm sure Mike Brill was doing some quick math there to figure that one out too.
You can see the tank on the Elspeth Conqueror's Death.
Yeah, that's 10 lands in play. That would be 30 mana, an explosion for 26, but that gets shrunk to an explosion for 24, and Mike Brill is right in the middle there at 25.
That's a good number when your opponent has 24 damage.
And so we're splitting the difference here. The second Elspeth Conqueror's Death going after one of the reclamations, and Ari has seen enough. He's done the math himself. He knows he has no way to claw back into the game from this board position. And we'll see what both of these players have access to in sideboarding here. You see Dovin's Fido, Mystical Dispute, Ether Gust, the famous trio here of banned sideboard cards, all of which are effective to some measure in this matchup. And then for Ari, commence the endgame, which we've seen him use to such good effect. Shark Typhoon, Nightpack Ambusher, a lot of great choices for him too.
Yeah, a lot of what we're going to be seeing from Lax is leaning out of these temporary answers like Aether Gust, just as a result of the fact that this game is going to be going a long time. So those sort of tempo plays that normally will be great in a Wilderness Reclamation mirror where mana advantage is the name of the game are not going to be great against things where the game is defined by those blue planeswalkers in Narset and Teferi.
And the third copy of Nightpack Ambusher making his way into the deck for Ari Lax, allowing him to play more of this flash game that we see Team of Reclamation often try to pivot to against these other blue mirrors.
And look at that wall of counter spells we see Brill bringing in. That is just all the vetoes, bunch of Mystical Disputes, and interestingly enough, cutting Nissa Who Shakes the World.
Yeah, 3 copies there of Dovin's Veto, really putting the hammer on Ari Lax. And as you mentioned, we saw Nissa leaving the deck. Also a copy of Elspeth Conquers Death, which is, we saw it used to such great effect in that first game, but it's just a little clunky at 5 mana, and if it's harder for your opponent to ever resolve an expensive threat because of the counters you're bringing in, then you have less good targets for your Elspeth Conquers Death, and that's not really the axis that the matchup is about anymore.
Right, and unsurprisingly, all of these Shadow the Skies are going out to the sideboard as Ari just leans into trying to play a game that's going to be fought on the stack rather than on the battlefield. We see those Elder Gargaroths staying on the bench.
And Ari Lax and Mike Brill gearing up for game 2 here. Mike Brill, one to the good. And perfectly fine opening here for Ari. 2 pieces of interaction, decent mana. An Uro to keep the cast flowing, maybe make some additional land drops.
Little bit awkward on Lax's side in terms of mana, but because this is not really a creature-based matchup, Ari can just find red at his convenience, so I imagine we're going to see that Fabled Passage grabbing an island unless he finds some other dual land on top here.
And a bunch of lands for my Brawl, as well as Narset Power Fails, which we saw really validated in game 1 as the card to lean on against Human Reclamation, as well as a copy of Mystical Dispute, which so often is important in these blue mirrors, if only just to dispute their dispute when you're trying to force something through or protect yourself from their play. And a second copy of Narset there for Mike Brill, who now may feel emboldened to run out the first one and put Ari to the test.
I think a lot of this just comes down to not wanting to get got by an opposing copy of Wilderness Reclamation. That's sort of the disaster scenario where you lose a game that you think you were in before, is if your opponent just gets to play Reclamation, then explode for 6 the next turn, and so on and so forth.
Or even if Ari Lax can follow up with something like a Nightpack Ambusher, which right now Brill has no good answer to.
No, well, Narset would get to break its fall, where it normally would land on Brill's jaw.
Well, sure. There's a minor consolation there for Mike Brill. We're getting cycled there for Brill. Who, awkwardly enough, does not have 2 blue mana open on this turn. So can't hold up Negate and Dispute, but not really at the phase of the game where that's going to be too important, except, look at this. Brill has Negate plus Mystical Dispute, so that, in this position, will be able to force through an Narset.
Yeah, just being able to cast Narset with that Dispute up is going to be such a big deal here.
Here it is. Narset Power Reveals. Ari cracks his Fabled Passage. Presumably looking to use the Mystical Dispute over the Narset here, given how time limited that can be. But his Dispute will get disputed, and Narset will land. Except, although Ari, with double red...
Oh my...
can expansion one of the disputes on another dispute.
And this is a huge win for Lax, both because this is something where you get Brill to tap low, and you also get to use an expansion explosion for value for a low mana cost without having to expose it as a 6, 7, or 8 mana spell.
And Emma, look at this. With all of those cards going to the graveyard, Ari now can just escape Uro.
Ooh, with a Negate in hand, with a Brazen Borrower to back it up. This is that flash tempo game that Team of Reclamation is known for sideboarding into. This is exactly what Ari Lax wants.
And even if Mike Brill can resolve his Narset, which is easier said than done, Lax can just attack it down. He doesn't care so much about it anymore.
And you know what? With this leaner game plan, Ari doesn't even have to keep playing all of these extra lands. We see him hold that Ketria Triome rather than deploying it here just to try and find more reactive cards to keep Brill on the back foot.
Temple of Enlightenment, Sky's down to the bottom. He needs something good here to get back in this game. Attempt his own arrow, which right now is just heading right back to the graveyard. Ari Lax has the one in play. And Ari Lax gets to cycle his own Capture Triumph, or maybe even just get aggressive with Brazen Borrower, decides to cycle his land.
At this point, with Brill at such a high life total, it doesn't really feel like the spot where you really want to invest a ton into Brazen Borrower itself.
Oh, and Shark Typhoon for Ari Lax, making his board even more scary.
Attacker.
And there's Elspeth Conquer's Death, which, if it resolves, which again, it will not, we'll deal with Uro, but Shark Typhoon plus Brazen Borrower could be enough to finish the job here for Ari Lax.
Yeah, just glancing, I see a 6/6 Shark at the very least. Well, I guess at the very most here. And that's if Brill does nothing, but this sort of tap-out control deck that Bant Ramp tries to position itself as forces Brill to just jam and hope that Lax doesn't have it.
Which, of course, Ari Lax does, negate taking care of that Elspeth Conquer's Death.
Now this may be the phase where we see the Borrower come down.
We could also make a slightly smaller Shark, or we could just activate Castle Vantress. Ari, flush with options there. Oh, and Growth Spiral draws him into Nightpack Ambusher, the perfect card to find off of that. Not that it was strictly necessary in this spot, I think, but he'll take it. Ari Lax will be happy about that.
Look, that's just the furry Shark. Do 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 do.
10 damage to Mike Brill, down to 7 now. A 3/3 Wolf will join the proceedings as well.
Second copy of Ambusher off the top for Lax. Look at how much pressure Lax has in hand. This is that tempo game coming to light where Lax realizes that outgrinding the Krasis Elspeth Conquer's Death deck isn't going to happen, so you need to make them dead.
And now Lax has very quietly picked up a second copy of Nightpack Ambusher here, so 3 lethal threats in his hand, if nothing else.
Step 1.
And Mike Brill says, good game. We will send it to a third game here between these two players.
And that game was incredibly representative of what can happen if the game starts to get away from the Bant Ramp deck, where because it has fewer of these reactive cards and its threats are a bit more clunky, then you're just going to kind of fall behind and lose to all these mana exchanges that Teamer can actually have more profitably.
Yeah, you can view Narset and to some extent Teferi as almost the reverse of Nightpack Ambusher, where you're trying to deploy a permanent to the board and protect that advantage as much as you can and kind of force the opponent to play into it in ways that they don't want to. But if it's a heads-up match between those two cards like Ambusher and Brazen Borrower can pressure your Planeswalkers. So if you fall behind on the board, those Planeswalkers can't catch you back up. Whereas for Ari, he can be behind in the game and then suddenly seize the initiative with those flash cages.
And if you want to learn more about some of these matchup-specific gameplay sort of tips, ways that you can posture yourself in matchups, just really level up your game, make sure and check out Versus Live every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where you can see Corey Baumeister, Ross Merriam talk through their own play testing. They talk about sideboarding, the way they sequence things, and answer questions, have a little bit of fun as well. So check that out at StarCityGames.com.
Yeah, a real study in contrast at times between Corey Baumeister and Ross Merriam. But if you want to see Corey teaching Ross some lessons, taking him to school, then you can catch that every Tuesday, every Thursday, again, 1 p.m. Eastern, StarCityGames.com, and on our Twitch channel, and then later our YouTube page as well.
But looking back at this matchup, it feels like Ari is looking at possibly reevaluating, because this sort of tempo-y game plan is so much better when you're on the play as opposed to the draw. We see him bring it back in an Aether Gust. Sheva commence the end game, looking to reduce his curve just that little bit to make sure he can really lean into these profitable mana exchanges.
And we see in the board there, 1 copy of Reclamation, 1 copy of Expansion Explosion, de-emphasizing that angle to the deck, which Reclamation and Explosion you might also characterize as some kind of Splinter Twin situation, Emma, but that's not the main thing you want to be leaning into and pushing all of your chips on in this matchup.
Right, last game did not have a Wilderness Reclamation, and Ari did not even care about trying to cast an Explosion.
And both players getting off to slightly slower starts here. None of the turn 2 growth spirals that can put either player far ahead.
Does a turn 2 Dovin's Veto count as a turn 2 growth spiral?
Even with my liberal classification system, I'm going to pass on that one.
Really, the true radical growth spiral.
And we see here from my Brill, he does have that turn 3 Narset rolled out ready to go, but it's so hard to jam that in the face of open mana for Ari Lax. So you could have the negate that he does have, or a Mystical Dispute, or some other way to punish it. But he might decide, he can sit on this Dovin's Veto for now, maybe scared of Growth Spiral into one of those high impact plays. But if Brill isn't making his land drops, then that situation doesn't really get better for him.
Yeah, at this point, I imagine what we're going to see is just cycling Shark Typhoon in the interest of both making a way to defend this Narset from an opposing Shark Typhoon and increasing the odds that you get to keep making those crucial land drops in this blue mirror.
Oh, and Mike Brill picks up a copy of Mystical Dispute, the perfect card to help force a Narset or something else through. However, right now, his blue mana is somewhat limited. He couldn't play Narset with Dispute back up in this turn, even if he wanted to.
How do you feel 1/1 Shark mirrors?
I like him. And we see the wind starting to blow here for Ari Lax. I sense a typhoon in the distance.
I really feel like these are just like, how you can't keep 2 guppies in the same tank? This is really the same situation. These 2 fish just really wanting to tear into each other.
If you want to own sharks, you have to do it responsibly.
And this is why they're on different sides of the battlefield. Brill, Lax, real humanitarians in that sense.
It's like Brill and Lax are taking their sharks to the shark park and they're just snapping at each other from across their leashes.
Well, Lax just making a land drop, passing the turn, leaning into this flash strategy, and a 2/2 shark coming into play for Brill.
Brill saying, you call that a shark? Now this is a shark. But I think he will learn just how big a shark can get in short order here.
My other shark's a bigger shark.
And 2 copies of Teferi Time Raveler off the top for Brill, who now has a bevy of powerful sorcery speed threats between those Planeswalkers and then later on Hydroid Creators, Elspeth Conquers Death. But you see just how important making your land drops is in these mirrors, where he now has to choose between holding out those great reactive cards in Dovin's Veto and Mystical Dispute, or trying to deploy those threats, which can help to nail the door shut.
Yeah, this is really the nightmare scenario for Brill in a lot of ways, unless he can resolve this Teferi.
Oh, but look at this. And now, Ari Lax, do you have the negate? Do you have the dispute? He has Petty Theft for the shark, but that's not the same thing.
No, that's going to just let Brill pave the way for his next big spell with this Teferi Time Raveler, going up to 5, ready to answer Lax's turn 5 play.
And in theory, Ari Lax has a window now to resolve whatever he likes, but a lot of those cards aren't effective in the face of Teferi Time Raveler, and there aren't that many high-impact plays there to begin with. Like, let's say Ari had a Nightpack Ambusher. Okay, that resolved. I'll untap, I'll bounce that back with Teferi, now we're just back in the same position. So here's Uro here for Ari, trying to find something that's going to improve his spot here.
And the real show of patience from Brill is not minusing with that Teferi to try and hit a land drop. That shows just how much Brill values development.
Yeah, placing a high emphasis on protecting that Teferi. I go into future turns. Finds that second source. Yeah.
Ooh,
that favorite passage
so
can be whatever color he wants.
It could be a boat.
It could. Choose to get another island over the second white for Elspeth Conquers Death, which we saw him sideboard out a copy of that card, and you can kind of see why here. Like, no appealing targets in the short term.
Yeah, it still feels like the phase of the game where both players are kind of fighting on the stack rather than fighting on the battlefield. And if you can assume that you're going to draw some more lands later down the line with the land density in these decks, you don't really need to prioritize that.
And Brill attempts to put together that pair of Planeswalkers. Narset Power Veil is finally finding a window to come down. And you see here, Dovin's Veto at the ready, if Ari does have some kind of response. That Blast Zone on Ari's side can deal with both of those Planeswalkers through Dovin's Veto, so my Brill can't just rest on his laurels here. He does need to apply more pressure at some point.
And this Teferi just continuing to roll up, kind of offering to undo 2 turns of Lax's development now.
I wonder if Ari passes with open mana ready to chance a Blast Zone, if then Brill will finally catch it in for a card, knowing that it's likely to be removed before he can do that again.
And look at this, Narset finding a copy of Shark Typhoon. That's gotta be so demoralizing if you're in Lax's position.
Absolutely. He will get to attack with a 1/1 Shark here. And Narset falls down to 2. So a Static Effect still doing a number on Ari Lax, but if Mike Brill wants to find another card with that, he will have to cash it in.
And it looks like Lax is weighing the second red source over an untapped source for the Shark Typhoon. But getting that extra land onto the battlefield is going to be the difference between Lax's Shark definitely being bigger than Brill's next one, or being the same size. And that sizing is crucial in these Shark fights.
Mike Brill draws a third Teferi Time Raveler, uses the one he has on the battlefield to remove that Shark, draws a second Narset Powder Veils in the process. So and even if that Blast Zone now takes down both of those Planeswalkers, he can rebuild if he wants to go that route.
And there's this incredibly intricate dance between Teferi Time Raveler and Shark Typhoon, where Typhoon is a great answer to Teferi, but Teferi also is a great answer to the bigger sharks that you invest too much mana into. So Lax is really going to need to find some sort of counterspell or something, or some other way to just pressure a Time Raveler.
We see the rope ticking down. Ari assessing his options. Mike Brill as well. And it's in a way unfortunate that Brill has all of these redundant copies of the Planeswalkers, because this is a good window to resolve something, and he really can't.
Yeah, it looks like Brill is just looking at that Shark Typhoon.
And Ari's saying, I'll show you just how big a shark can be. A 5/5 coming down for Lax, which can't be countered by Dovin's Veto, and because this is happening on Brill's turn, Ari still will get to draw from the cycling through an Narset. And for Brill, he knows he can't trade without Shark, so he'll make the smallest Shark possible, still get to hold up Dovin's Veto. Jump in front of the 5/5 Shark, protect his Teferi on board. And drawing Growth Spiral, a nice pick up there, can fire that off at the end of the turn if Ari Lax does nothing else.
That's always just such a feel-good whenever you have this reactive spell or something else to do with your mana if your opponent doesn't give you a reason to pull the trigger.
I think Brill would rather have a land here, and he's going to be hoping to Growth Spiral into a land if he does get to resolve that.
Absolutely.
And a 3/1 Brazen Borrower coming down for Ari Lax, who, with that in mind, it seems like his plan is less to focus on the Blast Zone, which would just remove the Borrower, but he might be happy throwing that 3/1 away, knowing that it's going to force Brill to take the shields down or to play in a way that he doesn't want to, and if he has to sweep away his own Brazen Borrower with the Blast Zone, that might be a fine price to pay.
Well, Brill found another copy of Elspeth Conqueror's Death here as well, which is not an Elspeth Conqueror's Death, excuse me, the white source, which turns on Elspeth Conqueror's Death, and that's going to unlock a lot with these Teferi Time Ravelers, because each of those Teferis, at the very least, can just bounce this Elspeth Conqueror's Death and really just eat all of Lax's resources.
And that's an excellent engine if Brill has the time and mana to assemble it, which Ari Lax, looking over the board, you see an opponent who's missing land drops, 7 cards in hand, has to be rolled up with heavy hitters. He's going to be trying to constrain his options as much as possible in these future turns. And yeah, we see Teferi catching itself in for another card. the 7th land drop, crucially, to allow him to maybe play Elspeth Conquers Death and hold up Dovin's Veto at the same time.
This is always the scary thing about an opponent who misses land drops with several cards in their hand. You really want to slam the door before they start hitting those land drops, or they're going to have so many resources that they will absolutely bury you.
It's a classic battle of Mana Screw versus Mana Flood, and usually the way that ends is Mana Screw, given enough time, can deploy their threats and overwhelm the Mana Flooded opponent. So if you are the Mana Floodee, you have to do your best to get the game over with sharpish. And a mystical dispute from Mike Brill. And now we're at the phase of the game where Mike Brill has to discard down to hand size. He's going to keep that land, so he's discarding a spell which is good in the matchup, and never feels good to see that from the other side.
Oof. Yeah, Aether Gust is no slouch.
Yeah, Aether Gust hits the pin for Mike Brill. And Knifeback Ambusher picked up here for Ari Lax. So I imagine Ari... I get the sense he's building towards a turn where he can use the Blast Zone to unlock his hand and just unload everything in one go. You know, pick a fight with the Ambusher as well, and then untap, and then maybe fire off Explosion, or resolve an Uro, hold up Negate. Ari has lots of options, but he has to fit them into a more cohesive game plan.
Right. Here, he just wants to make sure that once he actually pulls the trigger and starts developing threats into Elspeth Conquers Death, it's not just one threat at a time. Otherwise, he's always just going to be behind the ball a little bit as a result of the fact that you play your threat, they play an Elspeth Conquers Death, it rolls up, you bounce your Elspeth Conquers Death, recast it again. It's just this holding pattern where you're at the losing end of every exchange, and Lax is doing everything he can to avoid that play pattern.
And that Hydro Crisis has been hanging out here in Brill's hand for many, many turns. And we're going for a baby fish? Is that what we're calling that?
Oh no, that's just a regular jellyfish.
The criteria are different for different species there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Hydrid Crisis, notably most species.
Brill once again forced to discard down to hand size. And here's the Blast Zone taking down to Fairy Time Raveler. So this is the time, and there is Knifeback Ambusher. And Brill gets a chance to dispute that if he wants to. Will have to use all of his available mana to do it. Bearing in mind that Knifeback Ambusher is a green spell. And you have to pay the sacrifice. So here it is.
Count.
So we can fire off an explosion for 5 here? Is the current maximum?
Yeah, at this point, it's a tough call of whether you want to do that, whether you want to Uro and then have Negate plus Expansion to kind of fight some counterfight. There are a lot of options available to Lax here.
Uro hang out in the graveyard, ready to break its chains. And this is where you would love to have a Wilderness Reclamation to really light a fire underneath that explosion.
Absolutely. That would have been the best possible thing Lax could have drawn, and is why that is the namesake of this deck.
And it is still the best possible card. He could draw all this Uro. Let's see if that happens. Just another growth spiral there for Lax.
And you can see Lax going ahead and just putting in that Ketria Triome, shifting gears to try and hard cast a colossal explosion.
And just like in last game, Teferi Time Raveler as the first move of the turn for Mike Brill, forcing that Negate out of Ari Lax's hand. The third Teferi of the game here. That gets negated. And now Veto can protect Teferi Time Raveler. But we can also see Expansion on a Veto try to copy Expansion on Veto targeting Teferi Time Raveler. Will unravel that whole stack.
And now the question is if you want to do that or just cast Brazen Borrow as a 3/1 to pressure the Teferi. Because if all that happens here is a Teferi, if Ari doesn't think there's another Narset hiding out in Brill's hand, planning to just cast a big explosion next turn is very attractive. That would be for 6, maybe even 7 for an entire new hand if Lax rips a land and Brill doesn't have that crucial Narset.
And it turns out, sadly for Lax, Brill does have that crucial Narset. One of the 4 copies again in the 75. And yeah, Ari does cash in his expansion, which he really wanted that to be an explosion, but feels the need to fight over this even further.
All right, expanding that Dovin's veto from the looks of things.
So the long arm of the law really making its presence known in this game. And now Brill will follow up with that crucial Narset Powder Avails, finds another copy and another Elspeth Conquers Death.
And we're about 1 mana short from where Brill could cast both copies of Elspeth Conquers Death in the same turn. So that's why we see them leaning into that Narset here.
Now Ari could choose to Petty Theft the Krasis and attack to kill the Narset. But then that puts the Krasis back in the hand, and Brill is just making more and more land drops at this point, so he really doesn't want to send that Krasis back.
This is the spot where Lax is really just hoping that these Narsets don't do that much on their own, and Lax just gets to attack them down naturally. There's an Uro, there's a Borrower, there's a ton of Castle Vantresses out as well.
And look at this. Narset last turn offered the choice between a second copy of itself and a second copy of Elspeth Conquers Death. Brill took the Narset, drew the Elspeth Conquers Death anyway off the other Narset activation. Just how he drew it up.
Unbelievable. So strong.
Arilax will scry with Castle Vantress. Lots of good cards he can find. But he can feel this game slipping away, I think.
All right, Dispute, Stomping Ground, bottom. Nothing good there.
And Mystical Dispute, situationally so good in these mirrors. Not what you want when your opponent has more resources than they could ever ask for.
No, let's look back at game 2 for a moment, where Lax was incredibly ahead on mana and a little bit ahead on the battlefield. That was where Mystical Dispute is going to shine. This is the kind of game that Bant Ramp wants to be playing, where it tries to invalidate Mystical Dispute through naturally just playing and progressing the game to its later stages.
Another scry for Ari. There's Reclamation. We will see a lot more scrying for Arilax, even just in this turn cycle.
And with that Growth Spiral, that can be worth a good bet. I mean, it'll be worth...
It can, but not immediately. No. It's a problem with that Narset, right?
No, it'll be worth a good bit on Brill's upkeep, more than likely.
Which means even if, let's say, the first scry finds an explosion, we can't get that into our hand now with a Growth Spiral and then leverage that properly. You know, we have to wait. And with that second Elspeth Conquers Death, that might be too late.
Or...
Okay. So there's Petty Theft on Narset. So now Ari rubbing his hands together, hoping he can scry into something. There's Growth Spiral, and there's Negate. Okay.
All right, this is a
Now, unfortunately for Ari, he would love to be able to hold up that Negate. And he can. Just using that free Brazen Borrow, thought that Reclamation trigger had disappeared. Turns out he gets to have it all here.
Yeah, this is a perfectly serviceable turn of events. The issue here is that these Narsets, while they also deny the opponent card advantage, they generate their own card advantage. So Brill just has so many must-counter spells at this point.
And if Brill just replays that Narset, does Ari feel obliged to counter it?
Well, look at this. Brill is playing an Elspeth Conquers Death first, more or less declaring that they think that card is less important than this Narset. What kind of message is that?
And it's interesting to, with the fact that the Narset is public information, it's interesting to lead on the ECG, kind of giving Ari more choices over how he wants to use his counterspell, if he has one. Growth Spiral scry to the bottom for Arilax, along with the land. We're going to see an upkeep scry.
And this is that spot where, with a Wilderness Reclamation, you can't...
One top, Emma, one bottom. And there it is. Expansion Explosion for Arilax.
That's just enough damage upstairs. You don't need to draw the cards.
That's 6. We untap 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And there it is. Wow. Arilax with a timely Expansion Explosion. Out of nowhere. We thought Brill... This game was going back and forth. We thought Brill had just about wrested control of it. But there it is. And you saw that emote there from Mike Brill. He knows what it means. Ari keeping a card from top, defending all that mana with Reclamation.
Oh yeah, you don't put a card on top, attack upstairs with the borrower when there's this Narset on the battlefield if the game is not literally over. Arilax really just leveraging every possible margin to take this match and move to 3-0.
Brill hoping this isn't what it surely is, but there we go. And we're gonna Growth Spiral in response with no mana. Just get one more game action in there before we call it a day. Sadly, no flurry of cards into Arilax's hand to finish the game in style, but he'll take it. Arilax with Team of Reclamation moving on to 3-0.